like and subscribe, and leave a comment below. Beyond Antarctica, Chapter 34. A cool breeze whispered through the valley, gentle at first, but it soon carried a sharp bite. Within moments, the first drops of rain began to fall, slow and deliberate, each one landing with a soft patter on the rocky terrain. The sky darkened without warning, with heavy clouds rolling in like a thick, suffocating blanket that swallowed the white haze above as the rain intensified, transforming into a torrential downpour, with sheets of rain cascading from the sky, soaking everything beneath its relentless barrage. Lightning streaked across the sky, followed by a crack of thunder that reverberated through the valley, making the very ground beneath them tremble. The rain was so thick it was difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. Water poured from the cliffs in great torrents, turning paths into rivers and filling the valley with the unmistakable scent of mud and wet foliage. John wiped the rain from his face, his voice rising above the storm. "We can't build in that valley," he shouted. "That much is apparent." Kim stood beside him, her hair plastered to her head by the rain, eyes wide with concern. "I'm scared, Dad," she admitted, "not just of the storm or the elements, but of everything else. We're exposed. How many of these children will we lose? Disease, infection, not to mention the wildlife. The dangers out here are countless." John looked out over the landscape, squinting against the downpour. His eyes landed on the distant cliffs, part of a mountain range that seemed to have an oddly flat top, as if nature had taken a blade to it and sheared off the summit. Pointing toward it, he said, "There, we should build up there on that ridge. It's above the forest canopy, and the river below will provide them with fresh water." Kim followed his gaze and nodded. "But can we convince the giants to herd everyone over there? Todd, do you think they'll understand what we're asking for? We need to move fast and build more houses like they did earlier." Todd, drenched, gestured to the giants who stood around them, towering above the storm like ancient guardians. "I'll try," he said. Kim added, "And we need to move now before this storm worsens." As the lightning created a strobe light effect in the sky above them, they began their slow trek through the valley between them and their new destination. The storm only intensified. Trees swayed violently in the wind, with the sounds of creaking wood mingling with the crash of thunder. The path became treacherous, slick with mud, but the giants moved with ease, their massive bodies shielding the crew and the children from the worst of the rain. Suddenly, a piercing scream echoed through the valley, chilling the blood of everyone who heard it. The giants roared in response, their deep guttural voices filled with alarm as they quickly formed a protective circle around the children and the crew. "What's happening?" Kim asked. More screams followed, distant but filled with terror. Trees began to topple, crashing to the ground with earth-shaking thuds. The giants tightened their formation, bracing themselves as if preparing for an attack, with their eyes scanning the valley with wild intensity. John gritted his teeth with his hand, instinctively reaching for the weapon at his side. "Something's coming," he muttered. Kim's heart pounded in her chest as fear gripped her. "What's going on, Dad?" she screamed, with her voice trembling. The storm raged on, but now there was something else. Something more sinister lurking in the chaos. A sharp scream pierced the air again, louder this time. It was distant but unmistakably human. Kim froze. "Dad, something's happening," she yelled over the roar of the storm. John's gaze swept across the valley, but he could see nothing through the thick curtain of rain and trees. Another scream cut through the storm, followed by a thundering crash as a tree toppled over, its roots ripped from the muddy ground by the swift wind. Suddenly, Tony, scanning the surrounding darkness, froze. His eyes narrowed as he caught sight of movement. A quick flash, barely perceptible through the rain. His pulse spiked. "John!" he hissed, his voice sharp. "I saw something over there, by the tree line." "What did you see?" John asked as he pulled Kim closer. Tony's heart raced as he squinted into the rain again, trying to make sense of what he saw. "I don't know. Something fast. Something big." Another scream pierced the storm, and then a blur of fur. It was too quick to catch, too quick to identify. Suddenly, a child was snatched from the group, dragged off into the underbrush before anyone could react. "The children!" Kim cried, her voice filled with terror. The giants roared in response, with their deep bellows reverberating through the valley as they formed a tighter circle around the children. But despite their efforts, they seemed clumsy, too slow to stop whatever was preying on the group. "It's a pride," Tony shouted as he caught a clearer glimpse. "Holy shit, it looks like a pride of saber-tooths." Panic surged through the group as more children were snatched away, the saber-tooths moving like shadows through the storm, quick and deadly. The giants, though powerful, were too large, their movements too slow and lumbering to protect the vulnerable children from the nimble predators. Bob, seeing the chaos unfold, grabbed the shotgun from Tony's hands without a word. His face was a mask of rage as he cocked the weapon, storming forward through the mud. "Enough of this," he growled, charging toward the direction where the saber-tooths had disappeared. He fired a shot into the air, the boom of the gun momentarily silencing the storm as he charged toward the shadows. Bob disappears into the bush. Another shot is heard. The sound of the shotgun echoed through the valley, and for a moment everything was still. Then a fierce roar tore through the storm, a sound so primal it sent a shiver racing up Kim's spine. "Bob!" she screamed, her voice cracking with fear as she lunged forward. Her father's grip slipped from her arm as she grabbed his pistol from its holster, her legs churning through the thick mud as she barreled forward with rain pelting her face. Bob's voice echoed through the chaos, a clear and desperate cry for survival. The sharp crack of gunfire followed, each shot like a thunderclap in the downpour. Kim's heart sank in her chest as she charged through the storm, determined to reach him before it was too late. "Get away from them," Bob bellowed, firing once more. The saber-tooths, startled by the loud blasts and the sudden aggression, retreated, disappearing back into the dense forest. Blood and rain mixed on the ground, and a few small bodies lay motionless where the predators had struck. Bob stepped out of the bushes just as Kim arrived, her eyes darting past him, trying to catch a glimpse of what lay beyond. But with a firm hand, Bob stopped her, shaking his head gravely. "Trust me, hun, you don't want to see that. Keep moving." The giants, though slow to act, hurried the rest of the children toward the flat mountaintop, herding them away from the valley and up toward safety. The storm seemed to lessen as they reached the flat mountaintop, but the tension remained. The children huddled together, their eyes wide with terror, as the crew stood silent, catching their breath. Bob, shotgun still in hand, wiped the rain from his face and looked around, his body still trembling from the rush of adrenaline. Tony, still catching his breath, glanced over at Bob with a crooked grin. "You know, Bob," he said, "you could scare off more than just saber-tooths with that face." Bob shot him a look. "Really, Tony? That kind of joke? Coming from you?" John chuckled, clapping Bob on the shoulder. "That's what makes it so funny, old friend." Bob huffed, lowering the shotgun, mumbling under his breath, though a hint of a grin tugged at his lips. The giants wasted no time as the storm still lingered in the distance. Towering over the crew and children, they moved with purpose, with an almost supernatural strength. Massive stones, each the size of a bus, were lifted with ease, maneuvered into place as if they were mere pebbles in the hands of these colossal beings. They worked like a well-rehearsed orchestra, their enormous hands shaping walls, homes, and structures with precision. The plateau, which had been little more than an empty expanse moments before, began to transform before their eyes. The giants laid colossal stones in perfect symmetry, forming a protective wall around the flat mountaintop. It was as if they were playing with building blocks, each stone falling into place effortlessly, creating a fortress that would stand against time itself. Homes rose from the ground just as quickly as the city began to take shape. In a matter of moments, the barren mountaintop became a sanctuary. The sound of stone grinding against stone filled the air, mingling with the soft hum of the giants as they worked with an efficiency that astounded the crew. What had once seemed impossible unfolded before them, an entire city being built around them in mere hours. John stood, watching the scene unfold, but his attention quickly shifted as he spotted Kim, standing off to the side. His face hardened as he strode over, grabbing her by the arm, his voice low but filled with intensity. "I don't want to see you ever charge off like you did back there again. Do you understand?" Kim turned and faced him head-on, standing toe-to-toe with her father. "I think you forget, Dad," she said, her voice laced with a touch of defiance. "I'm ex-military. I've seen more than most of you. I might be the only one here who's been through a real firefight. I've got blood on my hands in more ways than you'd care to know, and I will never leave anyone behind." As she stood tall, with her pride showing, John paused, his eyes softening just slightly at the sight of his daughter standing so strong before him. A chuckle escaped his lips, though his grip on her arm didn't fully relax. Yeah, he said, shaking his head with a slight grin. "But you'll always be my little girl, and for the sake of not giving your old man a heart attack, just let Bob handle it next time, all right?" Kim's expression softened as she met her father's gaze, and after a moment passed, she nodded and gave him a hug. "Yeah, I forget you're a softy, and I need to protect your feelings." John grunts. "Okay, enough of that." Kim continues, "But Dad," kissing him on the cheek, teasing him. John turned, having enough of Kim's playful words, and moved on, with no real destination other than from her and her devilish tongue. Around them, the giants continued their work. Stones moved, walls rose, and a city began to stand strong against the backdrop of the sky, offering a new hope with a new dawn. The skies darkened once more, but this time it was no storm. There was a new threat looming over the newly formed city. Colossal birds of prey circled ominously above the mountaintop, with their sharp eyes scanning the ground below. The youth, who had just begun filling the makeshift structures with the food provided by the giants, froze in terror as their shadows passed over them. One of the giants, noticing the danger, lunged into the air with surprising agility, swatting at a diving bird that had set its sights on a nearby child. With a thunderous swipe, the giant's hand connected with the beast, knocking it off course and saving the child from its razor-sharp talons. The child scrambled into one of the makeshift buildings, trembling in fear as the sky filled with the screeches of the giant birds. "Get inside!" John bellowed, his voice drowned out by the deafening cries of the creatures above. Kim turned to run for cover, but before she could take a step, Tony's voice rang out in panic. "Kim, watch out!" Without hesitation, he launched himself toward her, pushing her to the ground just as a massive claw tore through the air, slamming into his shoulder. Tony let out a sharp cry of pain as the bird's talons latched onto him, lifting him off the ground. Tony was airborne, dangling helplessly from the creature's grip. The talons sliced through his flesh, and he could feel the searing pain radiating through his body. But as quickly as he was lifted, the bird lost its grip. Tony plummeted 10 feet to the ground, landing with a bone-jarring thud and rolling through the mud, his face contorted in agony. He clutched his ankle, wincing as Kim rushed to his side. "Tony!" Kim cried as she crouched beside him. Blood dripped from his shoulder, but Tony waved her off with a pained grin. "I'm fine," he managed to choke out, though his grimace betrayed the truth. "Fine, my ass. Let me take a look at that." Kim continues, "Superficial, but I bet it hurts like hell." Poking at it, Tony, in one of those rare moments where he made direct eye contact, grimaced. "You think?" Staring straight at Kim, he muttered, barely holding a pained smile. "It might hurt less if you stopped poking at it." Above them, the battle was just beginning. A giant, wielding what looked like a massive ancient tree trunk, swung the log wildly over his head, trying to swat away the diving predators. His movements were powerful but slow, and the birds moved too quickly, circling him with deadly precision. One striking at his back with a piercing screech, while another pecked at his face, ripping at his skin with its beak. The giant bellowed in pain, but stood his ground, swinging the log like a club as he was quickly engulfed by the vicious swarm. Feathers, claws, and blood filled the air as the birds attacked relentlessly, tearing at his flesh. The other giants, hearing his cries, rushed to his aid, barreling through the mud like stampeding elephants. With a fierce roar, one of the giants tackled a bird mid-flight, his colossal arms wrapping around the creature's neck as he twisted with brutal force. The bird let out a final, desperate screech before its neck snapped, and the giant tossed its limp body aside like a rag doll. Another giant grabbed hold of a diving bird, using his immense strength to slam it into the ground, crushing its fragile bones underfoot. The rest of the flock retreated into the sky with a flurry of panicked screeches. The scene was bloody and chaotic, but the giants fought back with a primal fury, their enormous hands snapping the necks of the birds that dared to get too close. The wounded giant, now missing an eye and bleeding from several deep gashes, stood tall in defiance of the winged predators, refusing to be brought down by the assault. As blood streamed down his face and limbs, he let out a roar of victory, raising his arms to the sky as the remaining birds fled into the clouds. One of the giants approached, carrying a large bundle of tree branches in his arms. Without a word, he and several others stacked the branches. Another giant pulled a pouch from his belt, filled with a mysterious liquid. With a flick of his massive wrist, he doused the branches in the liquid, then struck a large piece of flint against a rock. Sparks flew like dragon's fire, igniting the logs with an explosive burst of flame. The branches, now ablaze with a fierce, crackling fire, were picked up by the giants one by one and were used as torches. They swung the flaming branches high into the air, waving them wildly as the last of the birds hesitated above, their shrieks filling the sky. Smoke billowed upwards as the flames seemed to dance in the sky. The birds screeched in frustration. "I don't know if it's the fire or the smoke," Kim muttered, "but whatever it is, they don't like it." As if on cue, the birds retreated in a flurry, disappearing into the sky above, with their terrifying cries fading into the distance. The giants lowered their torches, standing silently for a moment, watching as the threat vanished. Then, without hesitation, they turned their attention back to the children, gently guiding them toward the safety of the structures. The battle was over, but the sense of danger still lingered in the air. John exhaled deeply as he looked out at the retreating storm. The storm might have passed, but new dangers loomed on the horizon. For this city to survive, diligence will need to be their motto. This is not goodbye, nor the end. Until the story continues, my friends. B.N.Rocker.